research subject, we look at time management both as an individual skill, but also something that's important to learn in the collaborative environment. Now, in education, the model of work that we often apply is a solitary one. It's one that's almost redundant in the world of work, apart from several industries, academia being perhaps one of them, where people still work in a solitary way and then submit a whole product for someone else to judge at the end of the day. Most work is actually in a collaborative group environment. And we actually see that sometimes our teaching modes are out of step with what happens in the real world. And this happens, I guess, because there's a mismatch between the idea of education as a model, training for the real world, and education having its own agenda, which is really ensuring that each individual has the individual skills that they need when they graduate. So here I want to talk a little bit about collaborative management, collaborative time management skills, and to talk a little bit about the way the world of work is quite different from the world of study in those expectations. And sometimes it can be a difficult transition for people, even people who perform very well in the academic environment, in that solitary, self-driven, self-motivated kind of way, to then work in an environment where they are dependent on and depend on other people and need those skills in order to manage those sort of teams and groups. And again, it's the way the world is changing. The world is becoming more complex. Even in the legal profession, it used to be much more of a solitary environment. But now there's a very strong importance placed on collaboration within an environment, within an organisation, with other organisations, with organisations that you're partnering with on a project, and even increasingly within the adversarial system, because after all, the vast majority of legal cases, at least civil legal cases, settle rather than go to court. So in some ways you'd think that the adversarial environment would be the last bastion of the individualist, non-collaborative kind of competitive environment, where in truth, in practice, it is an extremely collaborative environment because both sides need to be able to get the most out of the conflict, to get the best possible outcome without incurring those costs of going to trial. And in the legal research environment, particularly in the law reform environment, collaboration is absolutely essential inside an organisation, with external stakeholders, with the community, and so on. All right, first, there are two different types of collaboration to think about. First is parallel collaboration, which is the kind that you ordinarily would think about, which is collaboration with a group of people. They might be geographically distributed, which adds interesting new challenges in order to get people on the same page and communicating, but they're basically collaborating at the same time. The other model is serial collaboration, which is where you collaborate with people across time. People who work on a particular project or file before you, and people who come along after you. And this happens in particularly long-term research projects, and it happens in practice all the time as files are worked on by lawyers who then move on to other jobs, and then they pass those files over to someone else. So in many of these contexts, you're collaborating with people who aren't even accessible anymore. They're not part of the organisation. They may not be all that happy to get a phone call saying, hey, 7 years ago when you wrote this, what did you actually mean? They're probably not likely, even if they're being collaborative with you now, they're unlikely to know what that meant. So this is a different form of collaboration, this serial collaboration, and it's extremely important. And a lot of the techniques that we have about being careful and being well organised actually help us not only pass over what we've done to other people, but we hope that those who've come before us have done this as well, so that we've actually inherited a legacy of work that is usable. And people in practice tell horror stories all the time of going to find files that they've been told to work on and opening them up and there's nothing in there, or directories on the computer that there's things all over the place and no one knows what's relevant. All right, so what are some of the important things to think about when collaborating in the legal research workplace? First thing, documents. Increasingly, we use cloud-based solutions such as Google Docs or intranets within organisations to collaborate on documents. This has several important reasons why we do this. One of which is security in terms of backups. I mean, there's security as long as your system, your cloud-based system, is secure. So let's take that for granted at the moment. But also in terms of security of work and not having the situation where you lose a whole lot of work because you failed to back something up, or a computer crashes, or someone loses a USB drive or something like that. So that's the security aspect of collaborating with documents. There's also a whole organizational aspect in terms of making sure you use consistent file names, have a file name naming structure, so that, for instance, chapters or parts or versions all are labeled and numbered consistently, so that everyone knows what a file name means, and where the directories each of these files are stored for easy access. Again, you can waste a lot of time working on a redundant version of a file or the wrong version of a file because someone didn't file it in the right place, in physical files and electronic files as well. The other reason why we use cloud-based systems a lot now is versioning. There's nothing worse, and you may have had this experience. Before long, this won't be an experience people will remember because we'll be used to working in the cloud. But of an experience where you're collaborating with someone and no one's entirely sure what the current version you're working on. Someone's emailed you a file and you say, oh, okay, I'll do some comments. And they say, oh, sorry, I've been working on it in the meantime. Please disregard page 1 to 10. You know, but I've just done page 1 to 10. The kind of chaos you get when you don't have consistent, not only organization of versions, but access to those versions. Now, the wonderful thing about cloud-based versions is that you're always working on the current version, and you can have multiple people working on versions in different places at the same time. The important thing, of course, to remember when you're working in a cloud-based system is to make sure that you have all your access privileges organized well. So all the right people have the ability to read, the ability to comment, the ability to edit those files, and you don't necessarily have to give everyone the same permissions. You might want to just give someone reading permission, you just want to give someone else ability to make comments without actually altering the text, and others you might want to give full editing privileges too. But in all those ways, the way in which we use documents is changing, and it's changing away from the one file on the one computer to a shared environment as our work practices change. The same goes for the next area of collaboration, which are resources. And we're increasingly seeing different sorts of solutions for sharing information, sharing resources, and sharing references in programs such as EndNote or Zotero, where you can actually share a bibliography with others. Other systems such as Evernote allow you to file documents or file information. And one of the things about those shared referencing systems, they're extremely useful, but of course, you have to be able to find things. And sometimes it's not about the directory structure of where you store files, it's more about tagging these days. So having a commonly accepted set of tags that are used across your group, where you tag a certain attribute on files so you can search for those files quickly, is very, very important. So the ability to actually share information resources is important, as is the importance of being able to share communication channels. And email has become an increasingly poor way of sharing information. We're finding that people are becoming swamped by email. Email tends to be a lot of nuisance, busy work. People don't write very good emails. They write long-winded, boring, contradictory emails. I saw a good piece of advice that you should always write an email like Robert De Niro. You should always be, and this is like early career Robert De Niro, not kind of old recent films become a bit of a joke Robert De Niro, but you should write an email like, this is what I want, this is what I wanted, this is what I want now, and without all the preamble of, hello, how are you today? How are the kids? Did you have a nice weekend? Because we are swamped with information, and we're particularly swamped with information in email. So you might want to think of other sources, other ways of sharing information. The ability to use intranets, the ability to use some of those filing and referencing systems that we talked about previously sometimes has the ability to share information. And there are dedicated collaborative systems such as Slack, which are increasingly being used in industry as ways of being able to share information, contact people quickly, and often these systems have the advantage of being usable from mobile devices. So we're moving into a time when organisation, both self and group organisation, and time management is becoming something which is substantially different than it has been in the past. And technology is obviously a key way in which we organise things. And the last example I want to discuss is, I think, an interesting example of the way of the future, and that's the use of crowdsourcing to organise research projects. The excellent example of this is the UK politicians' expenses scandal, and the strategy chosen by the Guardian newspaper to actually crowdsource the research into the documents around that scandal. The background is going to be fairly obvious to you. Wherever you live, you've got a situation where politicians are scamming the system by claiming things on expenses that are not legitimate expenses. Entertainment expenses, duck ponds, duck islands. In one case, there was a partner of a politician paying for pornography on a hotel bill on the expense account. All sorts of dodgy things. And I guess it's sort of what we expect from politicians. Anyway, the scandal broke, and the newspapers wanted an investigation into this scandal. And the government released the documents, but they released 2 million pages of documents and said, there you go, good luck to it. Find yourself, if you can find anything in there, you can use it. So it was sort of, in some ways, it was paying lip service to open government, and it was saying, look, we're being open, we're giving you everything, but we're giving you so much you can't possibly use it. Now, what the Guardian did, and there's a link to this in the description below, the Guardian did was crowdsourced the process of sifting through these documents and identifying things that were dubious. And they actually ended up with over 20,000 volunteers who were working through these documents and identifying and finding things. They actually use an interestingly gamified system, which is a discussion for a completely different forum, but the system actually encouraged people to contribute. It rewarded people for contributing. It had a high score system for the people who found the most dirt in the documents. And it was extremely effective, and it was a great example of how what was an impossible research process, even for a rather large newspaper, his 2 million pages of documents, good luck with it, actually got turned into a dynamic and really effective research process by using the crowd. So there's a different form of collaboration. That's something that's not going to be appropriate for every situation, but it might be the solution to a particular problem that you do face in the future.